Hi, welcome back to my channel. Well, as you can see, I've flipped this chassis around here in my garage, so now I have more access to this area, and I need to start working on repositioning this rear end. I ordered the 4-link suspension for this months ago, and that just finally came in. So now that I have all that, I'm trying to plan it all out. Of course, what's most important is positioning the rear end front to rear with the correct wheelbase so that it fits into that wheel well. I made a whole lot of measurements to all of these pieces and planned it all out here on the concrete floor. And then I changed my mind on a few things, and time goes by and I've lost all my marks. So I start over. But one of the things I'm finding is these leaf springs, they only go in one spot. And the center position on this leaf spring is fixed. So that's my wheelbase, and that's the perfect position for the rear end in the fender well. So I'm just going to go off of that, and I'll just redo all these marks here in the rear. So if I just go straight up, I can drop a plumb bob or a bunch of different ways of actually finding that exact rear end mark. But if I do it this way, if I can see my bubbles, go by the actual center of that leaf spring mount, and that is the center of my axle. Do the same thing on that side. Then I can drop these springs out of the way. I can drop a plumb bob from that mark onto my axle, and that'll be positioned perfectly where I want it. But pretty much just gets me to what's in that box. Need to take an inventory of all the pieces and then figure out my angles and where everything goes and what I'm going to have to cut off. These pieces here, those are the original shock mounts for the Willys. These brackets were brake lines, emergency brake cable, and exhaust brackets. I don't think I'm going to be needing those brackets, and I'm pretty sure they're going to be in the way. For now, just get all the parts out and figure out where everything mounts. I don't exactly remember where I bought this. I actually bought it off of eBay. I bought it from a company that manufactures here in the United States. I read a lot of reviews on some of the makes of these triangulated rear leaf suspensions and rear spring style shock over coilovers. Didn't see very good reviews on a lot of the stuff that was coming overseas. A lot of them had buggered up threads. They'd have to chase the threads. They were powder coated and threads were powder coated. Just didn't get a lot of good reviews, but this had excellent reviews. So I'll pull up that information and I'll put it down below. So if you are interested, I'll list that for you. Very nice bracketry, beautiful welds. Several positions for the right height, depending on spring rates and the shocks and the style. Very, very nice bracketry. Hardware. These are the parts that I was finding that had the most complaints. A lot of them, the threads, they weren't smooth. They had to be chased. These have a nice coating on them. Most of the ones, aftermarkets and overseas, these were left bare, they were rusty. Very nice. Nice looking bushings. Feels like a polyurethane. Good adjustment. Very exciting. So all 4 of these link bars are the same size. The lower link bar goes straight. It falls exactly where the rear mount is, or I should say the front mount of the leaf spring. So the travel and the movement and the positioning of all these brackets, there isn't going to be any real issue. And I may even be able to use the exact same bracket that the original leaf spring is on. So that'd be a plus. And maybe I could just modify that bracket depending on the width, but it looks like it's even the same width as these pieces. So that would be really cool. And then it'd be just a matter of cutting this piece off, which is what mounts to the leaf spring of the Mustang, and then welding on this new piece, which will be the connection for that bar and a position for the coilover shock. It's got a pretty good weld around it, so it's going to take a little bit of work to get those ground off, but not too bad. And then this replaces that perch. This radius is cut for a 3-inch housing. The Mustang housing tapers from a 3-inch down to, I think it's a 2.5. So I'm going to have to modify that a little bit in order to get a good radius so I can get a constant bead of weld around that. That's not too bad. Position wise, this length with the length of the bar and using the original leaf spring bracket, it's not going to work. It's about that much too long in the bar length. So I'm going to have to cut that off, and then this is the new bracket. If it was an open channel on this side, you'd have to box it in. If it was the other way around, you don't have to. Mine has this leg on it, so then you can mount it underneath and weld it on, and that would be in place of the bracket that's there now. If I weld it on underneath, then I'll probably end up having to cut these off. So, a couple of options there. Like I say, this is originally intended to weld to the inside of the frame, but with these pieces I have, that's not even possible. So I'm definitely going to have to go underneath the frame and cut these off. So once I work up the positioning of that, I'll get it marked, and then I'm going to have to flip this frame over and cut away all these pieces that are going to be in the way, and then be able to weld this on. But for starters, let's continue mocking these up. To say, I can mark up here, position of this lower bar, where it falls. So that should be pretty simple for me to be able to do upside down. This top one's another story. This top one is intended to be mounted up like this. And these pieces to be mounted somewhere around here. And then that bar will go diagonally this way. And that is the reason why I need to get rid of these brackets. This one is part of the cable system for the brakes. I'm pretty sure I can work around that, because it'll just be a matter of I'll be welding this on up here, probably in about this position, and it'll be welding about here on the pumpkin. So yeah, this one definitely has to go. But the angle of this and how they're manufactured is a great guide for what angle these upper bars should be. The whole idea of the triangular system, the bottom one being straight and maybe even slightly outwards, then these being inbound to the rear end, you get the two working against each other, and that rear end cannot go side to side. It has a nice smooth movement up and down. The position keeps the rear end on angle most of the time. It's true to that 3 degrees that this should be angled on to the transmission. So I'm very happy with this kit. Looks like it's going to be working out very well for me. So now I need to get to work getting all these pieces out of the way. Got a lot of grinding to do. I need to grind off all these welds, both sides. I'll clean this frame up so I have a good clean surface to weld to. Pretty exciting. Now I'm getting down to the critical stages of planning all of this. I want the frame the correct ride height. I want the axle the correct height. If I put a 25-inch plus wheel and tire combo on here, I need to get the center of the axle 12.5 to 13 inches. And I'm about 12 3/4, so I've got the height of the axle right where I want it. In doing my calculations, the lower bar and this piece should be welded on parallel to the frame and approximately underneath the frame. Well, that depends on the travel too and what brackets I have underneath there and how far down that thing hangs. If I put it directly under the frame, things don't quite work out. My hope is to plan this right here at the taper. And it looks like I can make that work. Depending on how all this looks underneath, for me to put it there, it's directly under this piece right here. So I can't get it up on the side of the frame. I'm going to have to go underneath. And it's going to have to hang down. I need to look closely at that, but just judging from the way everything sits here and the height of this placement, it's actually perfect because I want this lower bar to be parallel to the ground. It needs to be level. So because this hangs down so far from the axle, having this lower bar be that far down and hanging slightly below the frame, even completely below the frame, is really about the position I need to be in anyways. So because this is hanging down so far, ground clearance is going to be there. The ground clearance ends up being the same at this end. So I'll figure out exactly where this falls, and then I'll be able to place this on the narrow end. It used to be out here quite a ways, the way it was set up for the leaf spring. It will be slightly in from that. So that looks great. In all of my research, what I'm finding for these upper bars, they should be about 15, 16 inches apart. That puts them on about a 30-degree angle to the frame. You can go as much as 45 degrees of an angle. Well, because this pumpkin is off center, you can see this is the center of my frame, this is the center of my axle. For me to get this closer up, I've got to get that one up. They have to be equal in height and preferably level to the ground. So if I get them up here, it's going to bring it up here where they mount on a 45. That works. It gets them parallel. But to get this one up on top as well, they literally have to be touching each other at the center line. And that's putting them a little beyond a 45-degree angle. That's really angling them enough that it really limits the travel. It's going to bind up. If it goes down much, not likely. Or if it goes up and actually bottoms out, I've got a pretty good fair amount of travel with this frame. So I could put bump stops on the underneath side of this to protect it from bottoming out and hitting hard. And it keeps all the angles and geometry correct. So because of what it will take to get these so close together on this particular rear end, I want to keep them down here. And if I get them right up against on this side so that I can bolt it in, that gets me at the 30-degree angle. I'm really close enough that I can then set down at 30 degrees and it will mount well on the top of that end of the axle. So with all that in mind now, I'm comfortable with all these measurements. For these brackets to weld on and the bolt go through, I'm going to have to drill a hole to give it some clearance for that bolt to go through. I need to clean up all the frame, sand it all down so I've got bare metal, so I've got a good surface to weld to. And then I'm going to have to get these leaf spring brackets off the bottom so that I can mount this piece underneath. And it's going to be just slightly underneath this frame, so I'll use these brackets to reinforce it for stability. Another recommendation I would have would be to set these all exactly the same. So all 4 of your bars are adjusted exactly the same length. That'll get everything in as long as the rear end is straight, so the wheelbase on both sides is the same. Then that'll keep everything equal. With these, I adjusted them out about 1 inch, so that gives me a good 1/2 inch of play on both, a little bit more. So that gives me an overall of 1 inch to be able to adjust anything that I might need to adjust. I can change the angle of the rear end a little bit. Right now I have it set at about 3 degrees, so if things change on the right height or something and it leans that rear end a little bit back to level that I don't want, then I can adjust that in again. Now this piece, I wanted to make it level, and to the center line of these bolts, I'm 14 inches from the floor, so measuring up 14 inches on this side works perfect. What I've done here is I've gone ahead and flipped the rear end over. I've just rolled it, so the front is now towards the back. So that makes this shock mount correct as it flips up and over. I want to keep the differential on that 3-degree angle. And I want this bracket for the shock mount side to be perpendicular to the ground. So I've got everything set now. I just need to tack weld it in and do the other end. These bars and how they attached right here, perfect. It was like it was designed for that. The lengths are perfect. The way this all fit in, couldn't ask for better. got these upside down. You can see they are riveted on. So it's just a matter of driving those rivets out. I want to go ahead and keep this. This is the emergency brake cable. I might end up cutting it off in the end, but for now I'm going to leave that there until I know for sure how my emergency brake all sets up. And then that is the other end of the leaf spring. No reason to have that hanging on there, so I'll drive those rivets out. As I had mentioned before, when it comes to lining up that rear end, I lined it up to this point, which is where the mounting point was of the Willys axle. And now I've dropped a plumb bob, because now I need to really refine and be exact with this dimension. And what I wanted to point out, when I'm setting up this plumb bob and I'm making my accurate dimensions, because this is so high, it'll arc and it'll move back as this pushes out. So just to demonstrate, when I get halfway down, I'm about 1/4 inch off. And then as it swings all the way down, I'm about 1 inch back that way. So I want to bring this plumb bob back 3/16 of an inch. That'll bring my axle back. So, because I want to stay true to the way this pivoted. When this was sitting flat and it was sitting on the overload springs, this was the position it was in. So that is the center point of my rear end. And where that overload spring sat, there's a mark here on the frame. So I can actually set that overload spring right here, and that will prove my point. But gotta be exact. Sure enough, there's my proof. I went by the marks where this was riding on the frame, and it's actually a little bit more than 3/16. It's maybe even a little bit more than 1/4. So I am going to literally set the rear end on this bracket so that that will be my mounting point. Because once I get up to where that position is on the rear end for the piece that I welded on, that should all line up, I hope. I've modified these brackets now to where they work out really good on the frame, and I'll show you that here in a second. But right now, before I tack weld anything in, it's really critical that I am positive about my track length. So I'm 104 1/16, and I'm 104 1/16. Now I can do a diagonal, and that'll also tell me about where I am with alignment on the front and the rear. That's 108 3/4. That's 108 and just 1/16 over 3/4. So anything within 1/16 of an inch on a diagonal is excellent. I've got my track length dialed in, that's excellent. So I'll go ahead and tack these brackets in. I've tacked in the others for the top side, now I'm tacking them in on the bottom side. And then I'll triple check all my dimensions and burn these in. Before I burn them in, I'll show you what I did. So what I ended up doing on these brackets, these were bent in on a pretty good angle off both sides. I cut this one off, and then I've got really good welding points on this end. I straightened this one out a little bit. Still has a little bit of an angle, but it matches the frame. And I'll be able to burn in here, burn in the underside, and then all on the back side. So those will be really strong. And then these brackets here, I'll end up being able to burn in all around the inside all around here. So these will be extremely strong as well. And then I've got these all tack welded in. So it'll just be a matter of burning all that in too. And I have 2 brackets on this side, and I only have 1 on this side. The brackets that came with the kit, I need 3 long ones. These are just a little bit longer than this one on this side. This one's short. So in order to get everything to line up, I need 1 more long one rather than 2 shorts and 2 longs. So I've got that ordered. I don't know how long that's going to take. For now, I've got a whole lot of burning in to do. Not only do I have to finish burning in these front brackets, but I have to finish burning in all the underneath side of that front independent suspension. So this was quite a task. I am really excited. You know, I have never done this before. It's something I've always wanted to try. I've wanted to try out doing an independent front suspension. I wanted to do a 4-link rear. I've been intimidated by it, but it's really not that bad. I mean, it's time consuming. There's a lot to think about. So if this is something you've been thinking about doing, it's not that bad. I'm surprised at how quickly all of this went together. I thought it was going to be a lot more time consuming. I just got to take one step at a time and just keep moving around and don't get overwhelmed with the whole project. I know I was. I was starting to get overwhelmed. Once I started cutting off the front suspension, it's like, oh, what have I done? But this is cool. This is really exciting. Get it all cleaned up, get it all burned in, get it all painted. I'm real close to getting this chassis done. Get the engine and transmission and finish up that rear end, and this is a rolling chassis, all ready for a body. Thanks for watching. Appreciate you tuning in. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe if you haven't already, share the video, show people if they might be interested in something like this that they can do it too. Goodbye for now.